The noise of battle awoke Maya out of a brief sleep. She jumped up and straightway wanted to dash out to help defend the city, but soon realized that she was too weak to be of any help. A group of struggling combatants came rolling toward her. One of them was a strong young hornet, an officer, Maya judged by his badge, who was defending himself unaided against an overwhelming number of bees. The struggling knot grew nearer. To Maya's horror, it left one dead bee after another in its wake, but numbers finally told against the giant. Whole clusters of bees, ready to die rather than let go, hung to its arms and legs and feelers, and their stings were beginning to pierce between the rings of his breast. Maya saw him drop down exhausted, without cry or complaint, fighting to the very end, neither suing for mercy nor reviling his opponents. He went down to his brigand's death.
Indeed.
The bees left him and hurried back to the entrance to throw themselves anew into the conflict.
From the hedgehog.
Maya's heart was beating stormily. She slipped over to the hornet. He lay curled up in the twilight, still breathing.
Yes,
she counted about 20 stings, most of them in the forepart of his body, leaving his golden armor quite whole and sound. Seeing he was still alive, she hurried away to bring water and honey, to cheer the dying man, she thought. But he shook his head and waved her off with his hand.
Why, he's an awful brute.
I take what I want, he said proudly. I don't care for gifts.
Splendidly.
Oh, said Maya.
Of course,
I only thought you might be thirsty.
But he never succeeds.
The young officer smiled at her, then said, not sadly, but with a strange earnestness,
Just so he doesn't
I
live off
must
me.
die.
What do I care?
The little
Maya
bee
shook
could
her
not
head.
reply.
She didn't
For the
agree.
first time in her
But
life,
not
she
caring
seemed
to
to
insult the
comprehend
cricket by
what it meant
contradicting,
to have to
she
die,
changed the
and
subject.
death seemed much closer
So,
when
you're
someone
a
else
tree
was about
cricket?
to die than when her
Yes,
own
a
life had
silly
been
tree
impaled in
cricket.
the spider's web.
But I must play, so
If there were
please
only
don't keep me
something I could
longer.
do,
It's
she
full
said,
moon,
and burst
a
into
wonderful
tears.
night. I must play.
The dying hornet made no answer.
Do make an exception
He opened
this
his
once.
eyes once again
You
and
play all
heaved
the
a deep
time.
breath for
Tell
the
me
last
about the
time.
night.
Half an hour later,
Midsummer night
he
is
was
the
thrown down
loveliest
into
in
the
the
grass
world,
outside the
answered the
hive along
cricket.
with his dead
It fills
comrades.
the heart with rapture.
Little
But what
Maya
line
never
of
forgot
music
what
doesn't
she had
tell you
learned
I
from this
shan't be
brief
able to
farewell.
explain.
She knew
Why
now
need
for all
everything be
time that her
explained?
enemies were beings
Why
like
know
herself,
everything?
loving life as
We
she
poor
did,
creatures
and
can
having
find
to
out
die
only
a
the
hard
tiniest
death
bit
without
about
succor.
existence.
She
Yet
thought
we
of
can
the flower
feel the
sprite
glory
who
of
had
the whole
told her of
wide
his
world.
rebirth when nature sent
The
forth
cricket
her
set up
blossoms
its
again
heavy
in the
silvery
spring,
strumming.
and she longed to
Heard
know
from
whether the
close
other
by
creatures
where Maya
would,
sat.
like the sprite,
The music was
come back to the light
overpowering
of
in
life
its
after they
loudness.
had died the death
The
of
little
the
bee
earth.
sat quite still
I
in
will
the blue
believe it
summer
is
night,
so,
listening and
she
musing
said
deeply
softly.
about life and creation.
A messenger now came and summoned her to the
Silence
queen's
fell.
presence.
There was a faint
She found the
whir,
full court
and Maya
assembled
saw
in the
the
royal
cricket fly
reception
out
room.
into the moonlight.
Her legs shook.
The night
She
makes one
scarcely
feel
dared
sad,
to raise her
she
eyes before her
reflected.
monarch and so many
Her flowery
dignitaries.
meadow drew her now.
A number of the
She
officers
flew
of the
off.
queen's staff were
At the
missing,
edge of the
and the
brook
gathering
stood the
was
tall
unusually
irises
solemn.
brokenly reflected in
Yet
the
a
running
gleam of
water.
exultation
A
seemed to
glorious
light every
sight.
brow, as if the
The moonlight
consciousness
was
of
whirled
triumph
along
and
in
new
the
glory
braided
won
current.
encircled
The
everyone
wavelets
like an
winked and
invisible
whispered.
halo.
The irises
The
seemed
queen
to lean
arose,
over asleep.
made her way unattended through the
Asleep from
assemblage,
sheer
went
delight,
up to little
thought the
Maya,
little bee.
and took her in her
She
arms.
dropped down on a blue
This
petal in
Maya
the
had
full light
never
of the moon,
expected.
and
Not
could not
this.
take her eyes from the
The
living
measure of
waters
her
the
joy
brook,
was full to
the
overflowing.
quivering flash,
She broke down
the
and
flashing
wept.
come and go of countless
The
spots.
bees were deeply
On
stirred.
the bank opposite,
There was not one
the
among
birch
them who
trees
did not
glittered
share
as if
Maya's
hung with the
happiness, who was
stars.
not deeply grateful for the little
Where's all
bee's
that water
valiant
flowing
deed.
to? She wondered.
Maya now had to
The
tell her
cricket is
whole
right.
story.
We know so
Everybody
little
wanted
about
to
the
know
world.
how she had learned of the hornet's plans,
sudden,
and
a
how she
fine
had
little
succeeded
voice
in
rose
breaking
in
out
song
of the
from
awful
the flower
prison
of an
from
iris
which no
close
bee had
beside
ever
her,
escaped.
ringing like a pure, clear
So
bell,
Maya told of all the
different from
remarkable
any earthly
things she
sound
had
that
seen
Maya
and
knew.
heard.
Her
Of Miss
heart
Loveydear
throbbed.
with the glittering
She held
wings,
her breath.
of the grasshopper,
Oh,
of
what is
Thecla
going
the
to
spider,
happen?
of
What am I
Puck,
going to see
and of how
now?
splendidly Bobby had come
The
to her
iris
rescue.
swayed gently.
When she told of the
One of the
sprite
petals
and the
curved in
human
at the
beings,
edge,
it was so
and Maya
quiet in the
saw a
hall
tiny snow
that
white
she could
human
hear the
hand
generators in the back
holding
of the
on to
hive
flower's
kneading the
rim
wax.
with its wee little
Ah,
fingers.
said the queen,
Then a
who'd
small
have thought
blonde
the
head
sprites were
arose,
so
and
lovely?
then a delicate,
She smiled
luminous
to
body
herself
in
with a
white
look of
garments.
melancholy and
A
longing,
human
as
being in
people will
miniature
who
was
long for
coming out
beauty.
of the iris.
And all the dignitaries
Words
smiled the
cannot
same
tell
smile.
Maya's awe and rapture.
How did the song of the
She
sprite
sat
go?
rigid.
She asked.
The
Say it
tiny
again.
being
I'd like
climbed
to
to
learn
the
it
edge of
by
the
heart.
blossom, lifted its arms
Maya
up
repeated
to the
the song of
moonlight,
the sprite.
and looked out into the
My
bright
soul
shining
is that
night
which
with a
breathes
smile
anew
of bliss
from all of
lighting up its
loveliness and
face.
grace, and
Then a
as it
faint
flows
quiver
from
shook
God's
its
own
luminous
face,
body,
it flows
and
from
from
his
its
creations
shoulders
too.
two wings unfolded,
There was
whiter
a
than the
silence for a
moonlight,
while.
pure
The
as
only
snow,
sound was a
rising
restrained
above
sobbing
its
in the back
blonde
of the
head
hall,
and reaching down
probably
to its
someone
feet.
thinking of a friend who had been
How
killed.
lovely it was!
Maya
How
went on with her
exquisitely
story.
lovely!
When she came to the
Nothing
hornets,
that
the
Maya
bee's
had
eyes
ever seen
darkened and
compared with
widened.
it in
Each
loveliness.
imagined himself in the situation
Standing
in
there
which
in the
one of their
moonlight,
number had been,
holding its
and
hands up
quivered
to
and
heaven,
drew a
the
deep
luminous little
breath.
being lifted its voice again
Awful,
and
said the
sang.
queen,
The
perfectly
song rang
awful.
out in the night,
The
and Maya
dignitaries
understood the
murmured something to
words.
the same effect.
My home is
And
light,
so,
the
Maya
crystal
ended,
bowl
I reached
of
home,
heaven's blue.
and I
I
sue
love
for
it
your
so.
majesty's pardon 1,000
Death and life
times.
will change, I know.
Oh, no one bore
But
the little
not my
bee any
soul,
ill will for
my
having run
living
away from the
soul.
hive. You may
My
imagine they
soul
did
is
not.
that which breathes
The queen
anew
put her arm
from
around
all
Maya's
of
neck.
loveliness and
You
grace.
did not forget your
And
home and
as
your
it flows
people,
from
she
God's
said
own
kindly.
face, it
In
flows
your
from
heart
his
you were
creations
loyal,
too.
so we will be loyal to
Maya
you.
burst into
Henceforth,
sobs.
you
What
shall
it
stay by
was that
my
made her
side
so sad
and help me
and
conduct
yet
the
so
affairs of
happy,
state.
she could not
In
have
that
told.
way, I think your
The little
experiences,
human
all the
being
things you
turned
have
around.
learned, will be made
Who
to
is
serve the
crying?
greatest good of your
He
people
asked
and
in
your
his
country.
chiming voice.
Cheers of approval
It's only
greeted the
me,
queen's words.
stammered Maya.
So
Excuse me
ends the
for
story of the
interrupting you,
adventures of Maya the
but
bee.
why are you crying?
They say her work
I
contributed
don't
greatly to the
know.
good and
Perhaps
welfare
just
of the
because
nation,
you are so
and she came to be
beautiful.
highly respected
Who
and
are
loved by
you?
her people.
Oh, do tell me if I'm
Sometimes,
not
on quiet
asking too
evenings,
much.
she went for a
You are
brief
an
hour's
angel, aren't
conversation
you?
to
You
Cassandra's
must be.
peaceful little room, where the
Oh,
ancient
no,
dame lived
said the
now
little
on
creature,
pension
quite
honey.
serious.
There,
I am
Maya
only a
told the young
sprite,
bees,
a
who
flower
listened to her
sprite.
eagerly,
But, dear
stories
little
of the
bee,
adventures
what
which
are
we
you
have
doing
lived
out
through
here in the
with
meadow
her.
so late at night? The sprite flew over to a curving iris blade beside Maya and regarded her long and kindly from his swaying perch in the moonlight. Maya told him all about herself, what she had done, what she knew, and what she longed for. And while she spoke, his eyes never left her, those large dark eyes glowing in the white fairy face under the golden hair that ever and anon shone like silver in the moonlight. When she finished, he stroked her head and looked at her so warmly and lovingly that the little bee, beside herself with joy, had to lower her gaze. "We sprites," he explained, "live 7 nights, but we must stay in the flower in which we are born, else we die at dawn." Maya opened her eyes wide in terror. "Then hurry, hurry! Fly back into your flower!" The sprite shook his head sadly. "Too late. But listen, I have more to tell you. Most of us sprites are glad to leave our flowers never to return, because a great happiness is connected with our leaving. We are endowed with a remarkable power. Before we die, we can fulfill the dearest wish of the first creature we meet. It is when we make up our minds seriously to leave the flower for the purpose of making someone happy that our wings grow." "How wonderful!" cried Maya. "I'd leave the flower too, then. It must be lovely to fulfill another person's wish." That she was the first being whom the sprite on his flight from the flower had met did not occur to her. "And then must you die?" The sprite nodded, but not sadly this time. "We live to see the dawn still," he said. "But when the dew falls, we are drawn into the fine cobwebby veils that float above the grass and the flowers of the meadows. Haven't you often noticed that the veils shine white as though a light were inside them? It's the sprites, their wings and their garments. When the light rises, we change into dewdrops. The plants drink us, and we become a part of their growing and blooming, until in time we rise again as sprites from out their flowers." "Then you were once another sprite?" asked Maya, tense, breathless with interest. The earnest eyes said yes. "But I have forgotten my earlier existence. We forget everything in our flower sleep." "Oh, what a lovely fate!" "It is the same as that of all earthly creatures, when you really come to think of it, even if it isn't always flowers out of which they wake from their sleep of death. But we won't talk of that tonight." "Oh, I'm so happy!" cried Maya. "Then you haven't got a wish? You're the first person I've met, you know, and I possess the power to grant your dearest wish." "I? But I'm only a bee." "No, it's too much. It would be too great a joy. I don't deserve it. I don't deserve that you should be so good to me." "No one deserves the good and the beautiful. The good and the beautiful come to us like the sunshine." Maya's heart beat stormily. Oh, she did have a wish, a burning wish, but she didn't dare confess it. The elf seemed to guess. He smiled, so you couldn't keep anything a secret from him. "Well?" He stroked his golden hair off his pure forehead. "I'd like to know human beings at their best and most beautiful," said the little bee. She spoke quickly and hotly. She was afraid she would be told that so great a wish could not be granted. But the sprite drew himself up. His expression was serious and serene. His eyes shone with confidence. He took Maya's trembling hand and said, "Come, we'll fly together. Your wish shall be granted."